It had been a couple years since I'd seen Donnie Darko, and going back and viewing it again, probably for the fifth or sixth time, I was really struck by a lot of the symbolism and deeper meaning that I had missed on the first few viewings. So what I decided to do was I'm going to write an in-depth analysis. I know thousands of people have already read and enjoyed a lot of the other analyses that I've done, particularly with movies like Inception, Mad Max, Blade Runner, 2001: Space Odyssey, where we really get down and dig deep into, you know, the esoteric and sort of hermetic or symbolic meanings of the films. And we try to stray away from just the outlandish speculation and really sort of back up, you know, with good argumentation, the positions that we're arguing for. So what I want to do here is I'm going to do a video discussion hitting the highlights of the Donnie Darko analysis, and I want to encourage you. There's going to be a link down below to the actual written analysis. It'll have a lot more information packed into it, because I started to do a video analysis alone, but it ended up being like an hour worth of talking, which was way too long. So it needs to be written, but I'm going to hit the highlights, and if you find this interesting, there's going to be even deeper nuggets of knowledge to sort of pick out in the actual written piece. So when Donnie wakes up, it's, you know, the setting is 1988, which is great because it's an homage to great 80s films, and that's one level of the movie that makes it really interesting. But it's not just that. It's also got philosophical stuff going on. It's got socio-cultural commentary going on. It's also got deeper esoteric stuff going on. And we're going to really highlight that in the article, but I want to just sort of tickle your fancy with hitting on some of the imagery there in this video discussion. We start out with the church song, where when Donnie drives into the suburban neighborhood, to his house, we hear, "Fate up against your will, he will wait until you give yourself to him." And so there's this reference to classical culture where fate is a deity himself, and so we know that what's going on is there's going to be this battle between Donnie's perceived free will as opposed to the notion of strict determinism or predestination. This is going to come up in his debates with Dr. Montanov, his professor for physics. So we've got that going on. The town is significant because it's Middlesex, and which is a curious name, because when we think of Middlesex, and that's something that's not either sex, and so it's ambiguous, it's unclear, it's not male, it's not female. There is a sexual aspect to the film that's interesting. The Middlesex also gives us the idea of something that's neither male nor female, that's sort of a hermaphrodite, right? And so this is significant because the film is going to have this deeper occultic element to it, and it should be recognized so that we don't misinterpret, try to read into it some other thing that's not actually saying. When Donnie gets home, and we have this after the dysfunctional family scene where the dad's this very passive male and the mom's in control, and the children kind of run the conversation and talk back and whatnot, and Donnie calls his mom a bitch. When Donnie's sitting in his room, we see the M.C. Escher picture of the eye, and in the eye, that pupil of that famous sketch, is a skull, or the image of death. So death is going to be one of the themes of this film. But it's not just death, you know, the question of death, which is not that interesting of a question. That's in everything. It's the idea of destruction, and destruction itself as a form of creation, because we have a reference to the Graham Greene story, The Destructors, and when Donnie's in class and Drew Barrymore, the teacher, asks them what the meaning of the story The Destructors is. Nobody knows, but Donnie chimes up and he says, well, it means that destruction is a form of creation. So you see, in the story, in the Graham Greene story, these youth broke into a house and burned it down. And Donnie, we learned, had already done this. You see, so Donnie had read this story and actually inspired him to go to actually do that. Donnie replies that destruction is a form of creation, and so it presents this darker sort of Gnostic notion or pantheistic notion that everything that occurs is ultimately a manifestation of brute, nature, destiny, force, power, just the ultimate one that is in that pagan sort of fatalist view, that everything that's happening is just a manifestation of brute factuality determining itself. So ultimately there's no free will, or free will would be an illusion if that was the case, and also there would be no good and evil. That would also be an illusion. And so destruction then is just another form of creation. It's just constant change and flux. And that's really crucial and key to understanding the movie, and that's why the death theme that is constant is then that death itself isn't is nothing other than just another form of creation. It's just the continual process of a meaningless universe if there isn't free will. That's one of the major themes of the movie. So Donnie will then become an anti-hero, sort of alter superhero, where he's not the good guy who rescues people and saves the establishment. He's the dark superhero who opposes the establishment, destroys things, and ultimately, he's a kind of a devil. He's a kind of devil character who's also a savior character, because the destruction that he brings about, in ways, brings about other goods. And so that's the sort of twisted reasoning that's going on here, the twisted logic. But that'll be covered more in the article. Another element that's really interesting is just like in the Inception analysis that I did, is the Jungian notion, Carl Jung, from psychoanalysis, of the mirror image being the ego or the self. And so this comes up 3 or 4 times in the film, where Donnie looks in the mirror and he sees Frank, the spirit of the dead that's been haunting him and controlling him and leading him throughout the film. That spirit of the dead is ultimately another version of Donnie's ego, the self. And so the film also presents, also a process, the self-individuation process presented in ways similar to Inception, although I wouldn't say that I think the entirety of Inception was entirely in Cobb's subconscious. I mean, it was all in his mind, it was all a dream. However, in the Donnie Darko film, we clearly have at the beginning an alternate reality which Donnie has to then crawl out of and face up to what would be the case if he didn't stoically accept his fate and die. If he did will, to power, will to be this superhero, wherein this alternate reality is then created, and all of these other events happen that are ultimately end up being something that he doesn't want, because he ends up killing Frank. So that's really what's going on in the film. This whole question of death, morality, predestination versus free will. Who is the hero? Who's the anti-hero? Is the hero really somebody who props up the establishment, the classical good guy, the Superman? Or is the hero the dark character, the Dark Knight, like we see with Batman in the modern Christopher Nolan version? So that's what's going on, and we have the Jungian imagery. Donnie mirrors pop up 3 or 4 times. Likewise, in the M.C. Escher picture, what that is it's the eye looking and seeing a reflection of death. And so that's what Donnie had seen. You see, Donnie saw in the mirror the reflection of Frank, the death that he had caused by this alternate reality. The criticisms of 80s socio-cultural dynamics is really fascinating too, because it's going on during the Bush administration, or during the Bush election of '88, between him and Dukakis, and the dad's watching the debate between the two of them. And Bush talks about going down to Nicaragua and his intrigues and machinations there. And we would later find out in actual history that was a bunch of drug running that was going on with the Iran-Contra affair. And of course the dad is just completely sold into this neocon Bush culture of the late 80s, as well as the PE teacher who's the big self-help promoter in the school. So we have this notion of public education, or in this case private education even, being dumbed down and stupid. I mean, the school mascot is the mongrel, right? That's a retarded person, or it's a it has the connotation of idiocy, and that's the mascot for the school, right? So we have that element going on. The other references to the 80s stuff is really fascinating, because we have the time travel, portals and dimensions, which was a theme that popped up a lot in the 80s, and I got in the 90s too. I guess it's always going to be popular, but everybody thinks about Back to the Future, and Donnie references it when he's talking to Dr. Monotov, his professor, and they have that big debate about how can we reconcile free will, determinism, portals, time travel, and God's existence. There's also the notion of science being this thing set over against religion that sort of turned Roberta Sparrow, the crazy old woman who used to be a nun, who then became the atheist scientist who writes the philosophy of time travel. And she figures in the film as this side character that's sort of the sage archetype that leads Donnie through ultimately to the idea that possibly there's no God. It's just me and my subconscious, me and myself. God is this projection that I have out of my subconscious. Again, that's all Jungian notions. And God represents for me this scary figure of death, embodied in Frank, the dead person that's leading him, the dead spirit. And then Donnie has to face up to this, that he's the one that killed Frank, and when he does, his entire world crashes. And so again, it's very similar to Inception in that regard. I mean, Cobb is just like Donnie Darko at the end. And so both of them are then sort of, they're heroes, but they're heroes in their own world. So that's a very fascinating way to present the hero epic. It's very different, it's very unique. Although some, though, would argue that if you were doing a Jungian analysis of it, they would argue that that's actually what the ancient hero epics are to begin with. This is this journey of self-individuation, both for individual man and for culture as a whole, or whatever. It goes all over the place. Not saying there's nothing to that. There's some stuff to that, but a lot of that ultimately ends up in a really wild Gnosticism. So I wouldn't accept all that. But it ends with Donnie realizing that he's the one that's killed Frank, and he mentions Deus ex machina, God from the machine, and so that's really what the final message. I mean, we talked about the predestination, free will, determinism, subconscious, mirror, ego, all that, and that culminates in Deus ex machina, that Donnie's notion of God is something that he's projected by himself, and that's why he when he crumbles, when he's as the therapist, when he has this breakdown with the therapist, she says, if the world ended, it would be your world that ended. It would be you and the projection, the God that you projected. So I think ultimately it has. I mean, it's a fascinating film, but ultimately it's asking a question: is God a projection? Is God this feared death image that we project, and not an actual being? And that what we really have to face up to is raw, deterministic materiality that we have to face. Free will is an illusion. We should stoically accept our destinies. I think that's ultimately what the film is saying, and that's the hero. The hero faces up to destiny. That's the Faustian man, right, in the Spenglerian analysis.